The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle, as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood at her bedroom window, watching the gardeners tend to the roses below. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her cup of tea, the steam rising between her fingers like whispered prayers. Today would change everything, though the world didn't know it yet. William had left early for his meetings at Buckingham Palace, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead before dawn broke. She could still feel the weight of his concern in that simple gesture. They had talked late into the night, their voices hushed in the darkness of their private chambers, discussing what needed to be done. The decision hadn't come easily, but it had come nonetheless. The children were still sleeping, their innocent faces peaceful against their pillows. George, Charlotte, and Louis had no idea that their lives were about to shift in ways they couldn't yet understand. Catherine's heart ached thinking about how to explain it all to them. How do you tell a child that sometimes, even when you love something deeply, you have to let it go? Mrs. Henderson, their longtime housekeeper, knocked softly on the door. She had been with the family for years, witnessing their joys and struggles with quiet dignity. "Your Royal Highness, shall I prepare breakfast for the children?" she asked, her voice carrying the same gentle concern it always did. Catherine turned from the window, managing a smile. "Yes, please. And Mrs. Henderson? Could you make their favorite pancakes today? I think we could all use something special this morning." The older woman nodded, understanding passing between them without words. Mrs. Henderson had always possessed an uncanny ability to sense when the family needed extra care. As Catherine made her way down the hallway, she paused at each of her children's doors. Behind these walls lay the most precious parts of her world. George, now 10, carried himself with a seriousness that sometimes worried her. He understood more about their public role than a child his age should have to. Charlotte, 8, remained spirited and curious, always asking questions that cut straight to the heart of matters. And Louis, 5, still believed in magic and fairy tales, seeing wonder in everything around him. The weight of responsibility had always been part of their lives, but lately it felt crushing. The constant scrutiny, the endless obligations, the way every decision was dissected by the media and the public. William bore it with the stoicism his position demanded, but Catherine saw the toll it took on him. She saw it in the way his shoulders tensed during public appearances, in the careful words he chose even in private moments. Their love story had begun like something from a fairy tale, two young people meeting at university, falling in love over shared jokes and late-night conversations. The world had watched their romance bloom, celebrated their wedding, and welcomed their children with genuine affection. But fairy tales didn't prepare you for the reality of living under constant observation, of having your every choice questioned and analyzed. Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from William. "Thinking of you. We'll get through this together." She smiled despite the heaviness in her chest. Even in the midst of difficulty, he remained her anchor, the person who could calm her fears with just a few words. Downstairs, she could hear the children beginning to stir. George's voice carried down the hallway as he helped Louis find his favorite stuffed elephant. Charlotte was already chattering about the book she was reading, her excitement infectious even from a distance. These sounds, these ordinary moments of family life, were what she treasured most. The irony wasn't lost on her that in trying to protect these precious moments, they might have to sacrifice so much of what they had built. The charities they supported, the causes they championed, the ways they had tried to modernize and humanize the monarchy. All of it hung in the balance. She thought about the letter she had written the night before, her words carefully chosen but filled with emotion. It sat sealed on William's desk, waiting for the right moment. In it, she had tried to explain their reasoning, their love for the institution and for the people who had supported them, and their deep need to protect their family's well-being. The morning light grew stronger, filling the rooms with golden warmth. Soon the children would come running down for breakfast and the day would begin in earnest. There would be last-minute preparations, phone calls to make, and arrangements to finalize. But for now, in these quiet moments before the storm, Catherine allowed herself to feel the full weight of what they were about to do. She had never imagined that love could require such sacrifice. When she married William, she knew there would be challenges, but she had faced them with optimism and determination. She had thrown herself into her royal duties, finding genuine purpose in the work they did together. But somewhere along the way, the balance had shifted. The cost of their public life had begun to outweigh its rewards. The sound of little feet running down the hallway broke through her thoughts. Louis appeared first, elephant in hand, his hair sticking up in all directions. "Mummy?" he called, running straight into her arms. Charlotte followed close behind, already dressed and ready for the day. George brought up the rear, his expression serious as always but his eyes bright with affection. "Good morning, my darlings," Catherine said, gathering them close. "Mrs. Henderson is making pancakes. Shall we go down together?" They chattered excitedly as they made their way to the breakfast room, their voices filling the space with life and love. As they sat around the table, sharing stories and laughter, Catherine tried to memorize every detail. The way Charlotte stirred extra honey into her pancakes, how Louis insisted on feeding his elephant a bite of everything, the careful way George cut his food into perfect pieces. These were the moments that mattered, the reasons behind every difficult decision they had made. When William returned later that morning, she would see the same mixture of sadness and determination in his eyes that she felt in her own heart. Together, they would take the step that would change everything, knowing that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away. William's hand shook as he read the final draft of the statement for the third time that morning. The words seemed both too simple and too complex to capture the enormity of what they were about to announce. Across from him, his private secretary sat in respectful silence, understanding that this moment required careful consideration. The decision had been building for months, maybe even years. It started with small things that gradually grew larger. The way Charlotte had cried after reading mean comments about her mother online. How George had asked why people said such horrible things about their family. The moment Louis had hidden behind Catherine's skirt when photographers had gotten too close during what was supposed to be a private family outing. But it wasn't just about the children. William had watched his wife, the woman he loved more than anything, slowly lose pieces of herself to the demands of their public life. The Catherine who had laughed freely and spoken her mind without calculation was still there, but she had learned to guard herself, to weigh every word and gesture. The spontaneity that had first drawn him to her had become a luxury they could rarely afford. His phone buzzed with yet another message from his father's office, requesting clarification about the afternoon's events. The king had been understanding when William first broached the subject weeks ago, though the disappointment in his eyes had been hard to bear. "I understand your position, son," his father had said quietly, "but I worry about what this means for the future of everything we've worked to build." The irony wasn't lost on William that his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, might have understood their choice better than anyone. She had lived her entire life in service to duty, but she had also been fiercely protective of her family when it mattered most. He could almost hear her voice, offering the practical wisdom that had guided her through decades of challenges. Catherine appeared in the doorway, having settled the children with their tutors for the morning. She looked composed, but William could see the storm of emotions in her eyes. They had been married long enough that words weren't always necessary between them. A glance, a touch, a small smile could communicate volumes. "How are you feeling?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. The question was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they were facing together. "Terrified," he admitted, reaching for her hand. "Relieved, guilty, hopeful, all at the same time." She squeezed his fingers, her wedding ring catching the light from the window. That ring had symbolized so many promises when she first wore it. Love, partnership, commitment. Today it would represent something else entirely. The courage to choose their family's well-being over public expectation. The statement had gone through countless revisions. Their communications team had worked tirelessly to strike the right tone, respectful but firm, explanatory but not defensive. Every word had been chosen carefully, knowing that millions of people would analyze and dissect their reasoning. Some would understand. Others would feel betrayed or angry. Both reactions were understandable, even expected. William thought about the conversations he'd had with his brother Harry over the past few weeks. Their relationship had been strained for years, but recent events had brought them closer together. Harry understood better than anyone the pressures they were facing. "You have to do what's right for your family," Harry had said during their last phone call. "The institution will survive. Your marriage and your children's well-being are irreplaceable." The morning passed in a blur of final preparations. Phone calls to senior staff members, last-minute reviews of security arrangements, and quiet conversations with the few family members who had been informed in advance. Catherine's parents had been surprisingly supportive, though her mother's eyes had filled with tears when she understood what their decision meant. "We raised you to follow your heart," her father had said simply. "We're proud of you for having the courage to do what you think is right, even when it's difficult." Those words had meant more to Catherine than any public endorsement could have. The children remained blissfully unaware of the gravity of the day. George had mentioned that some of his friends' parents had been asking questions about their family lately, but he hadn't pressed for details. Charlotte was absorbed in her art project, creating elaborate drawings of their family's various homes. Louis was simply happy to have both parents home for an extended period, something that had become increasingly rare. As lunchtime approached, William and Catherine made their way to the small sitting room where they had decided to record their announcement. The camera crew had been carefully selected, people who had worked with the family for years and understood the sensitivity of the moment. The room itself had been chosen for its warmth and intimacy, a place where they had shared countless private conversations. They sat together on the familiar sofa, Catherine's hand resting in William's. For a moment, they were just a husband and wife facing a difficult decision together, not symbols or figureheads or representatives of anything larger than their own family's needs. "Are you ready?" the director asked gently. They had worked with him many times before, and his calm presence was reassuring in the midst of such uncertainty. William looked at Catherine, seeing his own mixture of nervousness and determination reflected in her expression. "Yes," he said finally. "We're ready." The camera began recording, and suddenly the weight of history settled around them. What they were about to say would be remembered, analyzed, and debated for years to come. But in that moment, all that mattered was speaking their truth with honesty and grace. "We want to speak directly to the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth," William began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "Over the past several months, Catherine and I have been reflecting deeply on our role and our responsibilities. Not just as members of the royal family, but as parents and as partners," Catherine continued, her voice warm but serious. "We have always been grateful for the trust and support you have shown us throughout our marriage and during our time in public service. Your kindness has meant more to us than we can express." The words flowed between them naturally, each taking turns to explain their reasoning, their gratitude, and their hopes for the future. They spoke of their children's need for privacy and normalcy, their own desire to serve in a way that felt authentic and sustainable, and their deep respect for the institution they were stepping back from. When the recording ended, the room fell silent. The director smiled kindly and gave them a small nod of approval. "That was beautiful," he said simply. "Honest and heartfelt. Exactly what people need to hear." The hours between recording their announcement and its public release felt like an eternity. William paced the length of their private study, while Catherine sat curled in her favorite armchair, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. Neither spoke much, but the silence between them was comfortable, born of years of understanding each other's moods and needs. Their phones had been turned off by mutual agreement. Whatever reactions were already building in the press and on social media would have to wait. This time belonged to them, to their family, to the careful process of explaining to their children what was about to happen to their lives. George was the first to sense that something significant was occurring. At 10 years old, he had developed an intuition about his parents' moods and the rhythms of their household. When both William and Catherine called the children to the family room together, his expression grew serious. "Are we moving again?" Charlotte asked, settling cross-legged on the carpet with her favorite doll. She had adapted to their various residences with the flexibility of childhood, but William could hear the underlying worry in her question. "Not exactly, sweetheart," Catherine said gently, making space on the sofa for Louis, who immediately climbed into her lap. "But we are going to make some changes to how our family lives." William sat on the edge of the coffee table, positioning himself at eye level with his children. This conversation had been rehearsed in his mind countless times, but now that the moment had arrived, the prepared words felt inadequate. "You know how sometimes we have to go to events and meetings, and people take lots of pictures, and we can't always do the things other families do," he began. All three children nodded, their faces attentive but not yet concerned. Well, Mummy and I have decided that we want to step back from some of those responsibilities so we can spend more time together as a family, Catherine continued. We want you to be able to go to school and play with friends and just be children, without always worrying about cameras or what people might say. Louis, who was still young enough to live mostly in the present moment, seemed satisfied with this explanation. Does that mean more bedtime stories? He asked hopefully, making both parents smile despite the gravity of the situation. Yes, darling, William said, ruffling his youngest son's hair. Much more time for bedtime stories. Charlotte, ever practical, had more questions. But what about all the people who work with us? And the charities we visit? Won't they be sad if we don't come anymore? Catherine's heart squeezed at her daughter's compassion. Even at 8, Charlotte had already developed a strong sense of responsibility toward others. Some of them might be disappointed at first, she admitted. But we're going to make sure all the important work continues, just in a different way. And we'll still be able to help people, just more quietly. George had been quiet throughout the conversation, his serious eyes moving between his parents' faces. Finally, he spoke. Is this because of the mean things people say about us online? He asked, his voice small but direct. The question hit William like a physical blow. He had tried so hard to shield his children from the darker aspects of public life, but clearly he hadn't been entirely successful. Catherine reached over and took George's hand. Partly, she said honestly, but mostly it's because we realize that the most important job we have is being your parents, and we want to do that job really, really well. Sometimes that means making difficult choices. The conversation continued for another hour, with the children asking questions and their parents doing their best to provide age-appropriate answers. They explained that they would still be part of the royal family, but their day-to-day lives would be much more private. They talked about how some things would change and others would stay the same. When the children finally ran off to play, seemingly satisfied with the explanations they had received, William and Catherine exchanged a look of exhausted relief. The hardest part was over, or at least this portion of it. Do you think we did the right thing? Catherine asked, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at both of them. Look at them, William said, gesturing toward the garden where their children were playing an elaborate game involving Charlotte's doll, Louis's elephant and George's soccer ball. When was the last time you saw them play like that, completely uninhibited without worrying about who might be watching? Catherine realized he was right. Over the past few months, she had noticed her children becoming more self-conscious, more aware of their public roles. Charlotte had started asking if her clothes looked appropriate for events. George had begun censoring his own words, even in casual conversation. The weight of expectation was already shaping them in ways that felt unhealthy for children their age. The afternoon brought a parade of visitors. Senior palace staff members arrived for final briefings. Family members came to offer their support, even if they didn't entirely understand the decision. Catherine's sister Pippa arrived with homemade biscuits and fierce hugs. Her presence a reminder of the family relationships that had always grounded Catherine. You know I'll support you no matter what, Pippa said quietly as they stood together in the kitchen. But I have to ask, are you sure about this? You've worked so hard to build your role, to find your place in all of this. Catherine appreciated the question because it came from love, not judgment. I have found my place, she replied. It's just not where I thought it would be 5 years ago. Sometimes growth means changing direction, even when you've invested a lot in the path you were on. As evening approached, their communications team confirmed that the announcement would be released at 8 o'clock. The timing had been carefully chosen, late enough for the evening news programs to cover it thoroughly, but early enough to avoid seeming like they were trying to bury the story. William's final conversation of the day was with his father. The king's voice was heavy with emotion, but his words were supportive. I may not understand your choice entirely, he said, but I respect it, and I'm proud of you for having the courage to prioritize your family's well-being. Thank you, William replied, feeling some of the tension in his chest finally begin to ease. That means everything to us. Catherine spent the evening hours going through photo albums with the children, helping them create a memory book of their favorite royal events and family moments. It felt important to frame this transition not as an ending, but as the close of one chapter and the beginning of another. At exactly 8 o'clock, their phones began buzzing with messages from around the world. But they remained off, sitting together in their private sitting room, the children safely tucked into bed upstairs. Tomorrow would bring reactions, analysis, and the beginning of their new life. Tonight belonged to them, to the quiet satisfaction of a difficult decision finally made public, and to the hope that their choice would ultimately prove to be the right one for everyone they loved. The morning after their announcement broke across the world like a thunderclap, Catherine woke to an unusual sound, or rather the absence of usual sounds. No early morning phone calls from their private secretary, no urgent knocking on their bedroom door, no hushed conversations about schedule changes in the hallway outside. For the first time in years, the morning belonged entirely to them. William was already awake, sitting by the window with his morning coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. He looked peaceful in a way Catherine hadn't seen in months, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders during the night. "How does it feel?" she asked softly, settling beside him with her own cup of tea. "Strange," he admitted, terrifying and liberating at the same time. "Like jumping off a cliff while trusting that you'll learn to fly on the way down." Their phones, which they had finally turned on an hour earlier, told the story of a world in shock. The announcement had dominated news cycles across the globe. Social media was divided between messages of support and expressions of disappointment or anger. News commentators were already analyzing their decision from every possible angle. But perhaps most telling were the private messages from people they had worked with over the years. Charity leaders expressing understanding and gratitude for their past support. Staff members offering continued loyalty despite the changes ahead. Fellow parents sharing their own struggles with balancing public life and family needs. One message particularly moved Catherine. It was from a woman whose daughter had battled mental health issues. "Thank you for showing my daughter that it's okay to prioritize your well-being, even when people expect you to sacrifice everything for duty," it read. "Your courage gives permission for the rest of us to make difficult but necessary choices." The children woke later than usual, and breakfast felt different somehow. More relaxed, less rushed. There was no schedule dictating when they needed to finish eating. No stylist waiting to help Catherine prepare for a public appearance. No security briefings about the day's events. "The phone has been very quiet today," George observed in his serious way. He had always been remarkably perceptive about the rhythms of their household. "That's because we don't have any official duties this week," William explained. "We're taking some time to figure out what comes next." Charlotte looked up from her pancakes with interest. "Does that mean we can go to the park without all the security people following us?" Catherine and William exchanged a glance. Even this simple question highlighted how much their children's lives had been shaped by their public roles. "We'll still need some security," Catherine said gently. "But yes, it should be much more normal from now on." The day brought a steady stream of visitors, but these were different from the usual parade of officials and staff members. Catherine's parents arrived with homemade soup and fierce hugs. Old friends from university who had remained close despite the pressures of royal life stopped by to offer support. William's closest childhood friend drove down from Scotland just to sit with him for a few hours. It was during one of these quiet conversations that Catherine began to fully understand what they had gained by their decision. As she watched her friend Emma play with the children in the garden, she realized it had been months since the kids had been able to simply run around and be loud without worrying about appearing appropriate for any watching cameras. "They look like different children," Emma observed, settling beside Catherine on the garden bench. "More relaxed somehow, more themselves." Catherine nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that her children could finally breathe freely, sadness that it had taken such a drastic decision to make that possible. The afternoon brought news that several of their former staff members had already received job offers within other parts of the royal household. Catherine felt particularly relieved to learn that their longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, would be staying on to help with the transition and would then move to a senior position with one of William's cousins. "I've been with this family through many changes," Mrs. Henderson said when Catherine thanked her for her years of service. "This feels like a good change, if you don't mind me saying so. A brave one." That evening, William's father called to check on them. The conversation was warm but tinged with melancholy. "The Commonwealth tour we had planned for next spring will need to be reassigned," the king mentioned. "But I understand your decision. Family must come first." "I'm sorry we couldn't find another way," William said quietly. "Don't apologize for choosing your children's well-being," his father replied firmly. "I may have made different choices in my own life, but that doesn't mean your choice is wrong. Different circumstances require different decisions." As they prepared for bed that night, Catherine found herself going through her jewelry box, looking at the various pieces that had been gifts to mark official occasions. Each one told a story of duty fulfilled, milestones reached, relationships built with world leaders and charity patrons. "Do you regret any of it?" William asked, watching her examine a necklace given to her by the Queen for her 5th wedding anniversary. "No," Catherine said without hesitation. "I regret that we couldn't find a way to balance it all better. But I don't regret the work we did or the people we met. And I certainly don't regret this decision, do you?" William joined her at the dressing table, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Not for a second. For the first time in years, I feel like we're in control of our own lives. That has to count for something." They had received word that evening that several major charities they had supported were already developing plans to continue their work with other royal patrons. The causes they cared about would not suffer because of their decision, which had been one of their biggest concerns. "It's strange," Catherine mused as they turned off the lights. "I thought stepping back would feel like failure, but instead it feels like the first truly successful decision we've made in a long time." Outside their window, the grounds of their home were quiet and peaceful. No photographers lurked in the shadows. No security teams coordinated through earpieces. No advance teams prepared for tomorrow's public appearances. It was just their family, safe and together, with the freedom to wake up tomorrow and decide for themselves what the day would bring. The world was still reacting to their announcement, still debating their choice, still analyzing their motives. But inside their home there was finally peace. And for William and Catherine, that peace was worth more than any crown or title could ever be. 3 weeks had passed since their announcement changed everything, and Catherine found herself discovering small freedoms she had forgotten existed. This morning, she had walked to the local coffee shop in their village without a security detail, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. The barista had smiled and asked about her weekend plans just like she would with any other customer. "It feels like I'm remembering who I used to be," Catherine told her sister Pippa during their lunch at a quiet cafe in London. "Not that I'm going backward, but I'm finding pieces of myself that got buried under all the protocol and expectations." Pippa stirred her soup thoughtfully. "Mum said you seemed lighter when she saw you yesterday. Less anxious. The children too." It was true. George had started expressing opinions more freely, no longer automatically censoring himself to sound appropriate. Charlotte had taken up painting with a passion, creating bold, colorful pieces that covered every surface of the art room. Louis had convinced William to build an elaborate fort in the garden, complete with secret passages and a flag he designed himself. The public reaction had evolved over the weeks. Initial shock had given way to more nuanced discussions about the pressures of modern royal life, the importance of mental health, and the changing expectations of public figures. Polling showed the public remained divided, but was gradually becoming more understanding of their decision. William had thrown himself into establishing their new charitable foundation, one that would allow them to support causes they cared about without the constraints of official royal protocols. Their first major initiative was focused on supporting other families dealing with public scrutiny: military families, political families, anyone whose children were affected by their parents' public roles. "We learned the hard way that there aren't enough resources for families in these situations," William explained during a planning meeting with their new team. "We want to change that." The foundation had already received overwhelming support from unexpected quarters. Tech companies were offering to help develop digital literacy programs to protect children from online harassment. Mental health organizations were partnering with them to create resources specifically for families in the public eye. Catherine's role in the foundation focused on early childhood development and family support services. Without the constraints of royal protocol, she could speak more directly about her own experiences and challenges. Her first interview with a parenting magazine had been remarkably candid. "I spent years trying to be the perfect royal mother," she had said, "but perfection isn't real, and it certainly isn't healthy for children to see their parents pretending to be something they're not. My kids needed to see me as a real person, making real choices, sometimes struggling with those choices. The response to that interview had been overwhelmingly positive. Parents from around the world had written to thank her for her honesty, sharing their own stories of trying to balance competing demands while raising children. One afternoon, Catherine received a call that surprised her. It was from Megan, Harry's wife, calling from their home in California. "I wanted to reach out," Megan said. "I know things have been complicated between our families, but what you and William did took incredible courage. Harry and I understand better than most how difficult that decision must have been." The conversation was warm and healing in ways Catherine hadn't expected. They talked about their children, about the challenges of raising kids under public scrutiny, about the importance of choosing family well-being over public expectations. "Maybe this will help bridge some of the distance that's grown between us," Catherine suggested tentatively. "I hope so," Megan replied. "The children should know they're cousins. Family matters more than anything else." That evening, Catherine shared the conversation with William. He was quiet for a long moment, processing not just the words but the possibilities they represented. "I miss my brother," he admitted finally. "I miss the relationship we used to have. Maybe this change will give us space to rebuild that too." The children had adapted to their new life with remarkable resilience. George's school had implemented new privacy measures, and he was thriving academically without the pressure of constant public attention. Charlotte had made several new friends, children who knew she was a princess but treated her like any other 8-year-old. Louis remained blissfully unaware of most of the larger implications, simply happy to have his parents around more often. One evening, as Catherine was tucking Charlotte into bed, her daughter asked an unexpected question. "Mommy, are you happier now?" Catherine paused, considering how to answer honestly while remaining age-appropriate. "Yes, sweetheart. I think I am." "Are you?" Charlotte nodded vigorously. "I like that you smile more now, and that Daddy doesn't look worried all the time. And I like that we can have ice cream for dinner sometimes without anyone taking pictures." That night, Catherine shared Charlotte's observation with William. "Out of the mouths of babes," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "I didn't realize how much my stress was affecting them until it was gone." Their new life wasn't without challenges. Financial planning had become more complex without the Dutchy income. Security arrangements required careful coordination, and there were moments of doubt, particularly when they saw causes they cared about struggling without their high-profile support. But these challenges felt manageable in ways their previous life had not. They were problems they could solve together, as a family, without the weight of institutional expectations and centuries of precedent. Catherine had started writing again, something she had enjoyed before marriage, but had abandoned due to time constraints. Her pieces about family life, personal growth, and finding balance were being published in various magazines, always with the proceeds going to charity. "I forgot how much I loved expressing myself through writing," she told William one morning as she finished an article about helping children process major life changes. "It feels good to have a voice again, to share our experiences in my own words rather than through carefully crafted statements." The foundation was already making a real difference. Their family support program had helped dozens of families navigate media attention and public scrutiny. Their digital wellness initiative was being adopted by schools across the country. Most importantly, they were creating resources that would help future families avoid some of the struggles they had experienced. As the weeks turned into months, Catherine began to understand that their decision had been about more than just protecting their family. It had been about modeling a different way of approaching public service, one that prioritized authenticity over image, sustainability over tradition, and family well-being over institutional expectations. The true measure of their choice wouldn't be found in opinion polls or media coverage, but in the laughter that now filled their home, the freedom their children enjoyed to simply be children, and the peace that had settled over their family like a warm blanket on a cold night. 6 months after their life-changing announcement, Catherine stood in the garden of their Norfolk home, watching William teach Louis how to ride a bicycle without training wheels. The scene was so beautifully ordinary that it took her breath away. No photographers captured the moment when Louis finally found his balance and pedaled forward on his own. No headlines would analyze William's parenting technique or Catherine's choice to let their son fall and get back up again. This was what they had been fighting for, the right to live these precious moments privately, as a family. Their foundation had grown beyond their wildest expectations. What had started as a small organization focused on supporting families in the public eye had expanded into a comprehensive resource center for child welfare, digital safety, and family mental health. They were no longer working within the constraints of royal protocol, which meant they could move quickly, speak directly, and take positions on issues that mattered to them personally. Catherine's work with early childhood trauma had become particularly meaningful. Without the need to remain politically neutral on every issue, she could advocate more forcefully for policy changes that would protect vulnerable children. Her testimony before Parliament the previous month had been covered extensively in the media, but more importantly, it had led to concrete changes in how social services approached family intervention. I never realized how much energy I was spending on appearing neutral about things I cared deeply about, she had told William after that parliamentary session. Being able to speak from the heart, to share our real experiences, feels like coming alive again. William's relationship with his father had deepened in unexpected ways. The king had initially struggled with their decision, but as he watched his son flourish in his new role, his perspective had shifted. Their weekly phone calls had become less about duty and protocol, and more about genuine connection between father and son. "I'm proud of you," the king had said during their most recent conversation. "You found a way to serve that honors both your values and your family's needs. That takes wisdom I'm not sure I possessed at your age." The reconciliation with Harry and Meghan had been gradual but meaningful. What started with occasional phone calls had evolved into regular video chats between the cousins. The geographical distance remained, but the emotional distance that had seemed insurmountable was slowly closing. "It's funny," William had mused after their most recent family video call. "When we were both trapped in the same system, we couldn't see past our differences. Now that we've each found our own path, we can actually talk to each other again." The children were thriving in ways that confirmed every aspect of their difficult decision. George had recently won a science fair at school with a project about renewable energy, something he had become passionate about after attending one of their foundation's environmental workshops. His confidence had grown enormously once he was freed from the constant awareness of being watched and judged. Charlotte had convinced them to adopt a rescue dog, a golden retriever named Sunny, who had become the unofficial mascot of their foundation offices. She spent her afternoons after school helping with the foundation's youth programs, showing a natural talent for connecting with children who were struggling with public attention or family stress. "She has such empathy," one of their program coordinators had told Catherine. "The other kids trust her immediately because she understands what they're going through in a way most adults don't." Louis remained their family's source of pure joy, approaching each day with enthusiasm and wonder. Without the pressure of official events and photo shoots, he had developed a love for building elaborate Lego creations and could often be found constructing complex cities on the floor of William's office. The public's perception of their choice had continued to evolve positively. What initially felt like abandonment to some had come to be seen as a courageous prioritization of family values. Their approval ratings, while no longer officially tracked, were reportedly higher than they had been in years. More importantly, they had inadvertently sparked a broader conversation about work-life balance, the pressure on public figures, and the importance of protecting children from adult responsibilities. Other royal families around the world had implemented new protocols to shield young royals from media attention. Several celebrity families had spoken publicly about following William and Catherine's example in prioritizing their children's well-being over their careers. Catherine had recently received a letter from a young mother whose husband was a rising political figure. "Your example gave me permission to say no when they wanted to use our family for campaign photo opportunities," the woman had written. "My children are happier, my marriage is stronger, and my husband is actually a better public servant because he knows his family is protected and supported." These letters arrived almost daily now, from families around the world who had found inspiration in their choice to step back. Each one reinforced Catherine's conviction that they had made the right decision, not just for themselves, but as an example for others facing similar pressures. The foundation had also launched an international conference on protecting children in public families. Representatives from royal houses, political families, celebrity households, and military families had gathered to share strategies and resources. The event had been covered globally, But more importantly, it had created a network of support for families who had previously felt isolated in their unique challenges. "We're not the first family to face these pressures," William had said during his keynote address. "But we hope we can be among the first to openly acknowledge that those pressures are real and that protecting our children from them isn't selfish. It's essential." One afternoon, as Catherine was working in her home office, she received a call from her former private secretary. Several charities they had previously patronized wanted to know if they would consider returning to official roles, even in a limited capacity. "The work you were doing was too important to lose," her former colleague explained. "Everyone understands why you stepped back, but there's hope that maybe you could find a middle path." Catherine had thought carefully before responding. "The work is important," she agreed, "but there are other ways to support it. Our foundation can partner with these organizations. We can use our platform to highlight their efforts without getting caught up in the machinery of official royal duties again." It was a conversation that highlighted how much their perspective had shifted. Their commitment to service remained as strong as ever, but their understanding of what effective service looked like had completely changed. They were reaching more people, creating more impact, and generating more meaningful change than they ever had within the traditional royal framework. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner around their kitchen table, Catherine looked at each face and felt a deep sense of peace. George was excitedly describing his latest school project. Charlotte was planning weekend activities for the family. Louis was attempting to feed vegetables to his stuffed elephant. William was listening to each child with the kind of relaxed attention that had been impossible when his mind was always partially occupied with official duties. This was success. Not the kind measured by headlines or approval ratings, but the kind that mattered most: a family thriving together, free to love and laugh and grow without the weight of the world's expectations on their shoulders. A year had passed since the day that changed everything. Catherine stood in the same bedroom where she had made the final decision to step back from royal life. But everything felt different now. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed brighter, the sounds of her children playing in the garden below more joyful, and the weight that had once pressed on her shoulders had lifted completely. Today marked not just the anniversary of their announcement, but the launch of their most ambitious foundation project yet, a global initiative to create safe spaces for children in public families. Representatives from 30 countries were gathering in London, not for a traditional royal event with its careful protocols and ceremonial constraints, but for a working conference designed to create real, lasting change. William appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day ahead. "Ready to change the world?" he asked with a smile that reminded Catherine of the young man she had fallen in love with at university. Confident, passionate, and unencumbered by the weight of expectation. "I think we already have," she replied, reaching for his hand, "at least our corner of it." The past year had brought validation of their choice in ways they never could have anticipated. Their children were flourishing academically, socially, and emotionally. George had recently been elected to his school's student council, a development that would have been impossible under the constant scrutiny of royal life. Charlotte had started a small environmental club with her friends, inspired by her parents' foundation work, but driven by her own passion for protecting animals. Louis had begun learning to play piano, filling their home with music and laughter. More importantly, they had maintained their ability to serve and create positive change while protecting their family's well-being. Their foundation had helped more than 500 families navigate public scrutiny. Their advocacy had led to policy changes in multiple countries. Their example had inspired countless other families to prioritize their children's mental health over public expectations. "The ripple effects keep surprising me," William had told Catherine the previous week after receiving yet another letter from a family who had found courage in their story. "I thought stepping back would limit our impact, but it seems to have multiplied it." The morning brought their usual rhythm: breakfast with the children, quick hugs goodbye as they headed off to school, and then the drive to London together. No security convoy, no predetermined route, just the two of them in their car talking about the day ahead and sharing comfortable silence when conversation wasn't needed. The conference venue was buzzing with energy when they arrived. Catherine felt a familiar thrill at seeing so many passionate people gathered around a shared purpose, but without the underlying anxiety that had always accompanied royal events. Here she could speak authentically from her own experience, rather than carefully navigating diplomatic sensitivities. Her opening address drew on everything they had learned over the past year. "We discovered that protection isn't the opposite of service," she told the assembled delegates. "It's the foundation that makes sustainable service possible. When we take care of our families first, we're better equipped to take care of others." The response was immediate and powerful. Audience members rose to their feet, not in the polite acknowledgement typical of royal events, but in genuine appreciation for words that resonated with their own experiences and struggles. William's presentation focused on the practical tools their foundation had developed: digital security protocols, media literacy curricula, therapeutic resources specifically designed for children dealing with public attention. What had started as solutions for their own family had evolved into a comprehensive support system that was already being implemented around the world. During the lunch break, Catherine found herself in conversation with a woman from Sweden, whose husband was a prominent political figure. "Your choice gave me permission to protect my children in ways I hadn't even considered before," the woman shared. "My daughter is 8, the same age as Princess Charlotte, and she's finally able to just be a normal little girl because we learned from your example." These conversations happened throughout the day. Parents, spouses, and even children of public figures sharing how William and Catherine's decision had influenced their own choices. Each story reinforced their conviction that stepping back had been exactly the right choice. The highlight of the conference came during the final session, when they announced the creation of a permanent international resource center, funded by their foundation and supported by governments and organizations worldwide. It would provide ongoing assistance to families navigating public life while protecting their children's privacy and well-being. "This is bigger than any single royal tour or charitable patronage could ever have been," William said during their closing remarks. "This is systemic change that will protect children for generations to come." That evening, they returned home to find their children had prepared a celebration dinner. George had made his specialty, spaghetti with homemade sauce. Charlotte had created elaborate place cards for everyone, including Sonny the dog. Louis had picked flowers from their garden for the centerpiece. "We saw the conference on the news at school," George said proudly. "My teacher said you're changing how the whole world thinks about protecting kids." "We all are," Catherine corrected gently. "This is work our whole family is doing together." As they sat around their kitchen table, sharing stories from their day and making plans for the weekend, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The decision that had once felt like the hardest thing they would ever do now seemed like the most natural choice in the world. Her phone buzzed with a text from the king. "Watched your presentation online. Extraordinary work. Proud of you both." The message was followed by another from Harry. "Saw the news coverage. Amazing impact. The kids send love to their cousins." Later that night, after the children were in bed, William and Catherine walked through their garden together. The same space where they had once worried about photographers hiding in the bushes was now simply their sanctuary, a place where their family could grow and play and dream without fear. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't made this choice?" Catherine asked as they paused by the tree where Louis had recently hung a swing. "Sometimes," William admitted. "But then I look at our children, at the work we're doing, at how happy you are, and I know we chose exactly the right path. We didn't lose our ability to serve. We found a better way to do it." The stars were bright above them, unmarred by city lights or the constant bustle of official duties. In the distance, they could hear the faint sound of classical music drifting from Louis's bedroom window where he had fallen, asleep to the piano recordings that had inspired his new musical interest. Their choice had indeed broken hearts, and their own initially, and those of people who had loved and supported them in their royal roles. But from that breaking had come something stronger and more beautiful than they had ever imagined possible. They had found a way to honor both their commitment to service and their responsibility to their family, creating a legacy that would protect other families facing similar challenges. As they walked back toward their home, Catherine felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you have lived according to your values, even when it required enormous courage to do so. Their farewell to royal duty had become a greeting to a new kind of purpose, one that had touched hearts and changed minds around the world. The decision that had once seemed like an ending had become the most important beginning of their lives together.